Hi, I'm iKia, and for today's video, I want to have an in-depth look into the now updated TU22 DPS tables, the burst, sustain, damage per mag, and some other ancillary things. Of course, these are not on build yet. We're also not going to go way too in-depth. We're just going to skim the surface somewhat, as we're going to have an in-depth look into every weapon class, but then on build, which is going to be much more thorough, as we did for Project Resolve and such, as the old ones, for instance, exist still. But the on builds are not done yet. The DPS table is, though, and we can look around it already, pull some conclusions. And then as well, I have, towards the end, a call to action for some help, maybe figuring out a mystery that has always existed with any DPS tables. So yeah, we'll go into all of those. So yeah, let's go first start by jumping into the folder that it's in and then the file itself. And this is, of course, the DPS tables folder. This will be linked down below. Most will be familiar with this. So the file that has been updated is the main file, as we go into looking at all of the numbers and such. There are some additions as well, as we'll go through, as for instance, with rifles, I've added now fast stance comparison, because it kind of makes sense. And as well, for rifles, shotguns, and pistols, I've added in a base damage a comparison, which just lists them by base damage, which, you know, can make it easier to quickly ascertain which has the higher base. And yeah, everything has been updated. The old numbers are no longer in here, but if you would want them for a few weeks after this video, this PTS2 file will still be here. In there, the old numbers are on that right side here, as that's the old numbers from TU21 and before, or well, since Project Resolve, basically. And then, yeah, the PTS2 numbers, which actually haven't changed much overall, but yeah, there is a big discrepancy. And that comes as I started to fill some of these in and started to check them against in-game. Turns out that those beautiful graphics that they put out, as here they are from the final version, so this is from the final patch notes, turns out they're basically all off, and all of them on the base damage, not on other numbers, but their base damage. For instance, if we look here at the ACR and we look at that number that it has up there of a 58,886, so 58,886. If we go to the final version here and we go to the ACR, 58,896 and a half. So 10 and a half off. This seems to be the case through all of these. And this seems to be the consensus as well from everybody I've talked to. And also I've tried it on multiple accounts and everybody else has the same issue. Which is odd. As yeah, basically every weapon is somewhere between +9 to +20, and not percentage, of course, just it's like just on there. It's, of course, that is not enough to change the order of things from PTS2. That's small changes, and basically all of them are getting a tiny changes into that number. But it is enough to throw off any calculations. So yeah, I had to go through and just calculate back from in-game. Yeah, that took a little while, of course, but we got it done, so that's good. The other thing, of course, is that this is not the best way to compare for on build, because we have weapons that have different mod slot amounts. The better way, of course, to compare, and we'll do those later on in the future, is to compare them on build. So if we have the option to compare them, for instance, as we had after Project Resolve, on strikers, on actual build, how they kind of stack up with talents, and also with some of the exotics, the talents active, and also accounting for their crit chance and crit damages and such, that gives a much better view. But this basically requires the other list to be there and complete, so we need to do this first before we can, you know, take that and create these, which I'll do in the future, and we'll have a full in-depth look into all weapon types. This will not be a full in-depth look, even though it is called one. We're just going to more in-depth look the DPS table. So, but also, if you want a somewhat deeper in-depth look to it, there's also the PTS2, or rather, actually, it was a PTS1, I think, weapon rebalance And not much has changed since, so you could kind of look through that. Although, yeah, there are definitely changes, and that is outdated, but that is a much more in-depth video. But here, let's go actually look at, starting with ARs. We'll go through every category, but we'll keep it kind of brief. And yeah, as I said in the intro as well, towards the end, we'll go into a mystery that I'm hoping people can help solve at some point. But yeah, let's go get started with ARs. And yes, let's start with ARs, always one of the more popular categories, definitely. Yeah, a lot has changed. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit, of course, to kind of make it easier. But of course, everything is linked down below, so you can kind of, if you want to, that is the place to go to look at them for yourself. First, let's, as always, explain kind of burst and sustain. Very briefly here, though, burst is basically the upper bound of theoretical damage. Sustain is the lower bound of theoretical damage. So your theoretical damage kind of lives between these two markers. If technically you're getting 100% hit rate and stuff, that's what's called theoretical damage. This would be eventually your lowest point of output in DPS, and the burst will be the highest. And the reason we use these is they are simple to calculate and give a lot of information. Generally, what I compare them to, and eventually I will also make a burst and sustain guide, although as well one exists in that folder, which is a brief one, which I would recommend reading through, which kind of visually explains it, but maybe let's use that here as well as a teaching tool. So in the second picture, the red line is basically burst. The green line is sustain. These are from MX Watts. If you you might notice, you might have seen them before. But basically, the two numbers encapsulate our theoretical output. And yeah, burst kind of keeps with it and overlaps with it for the first mag, and then kind of actually zooms away from it. And sustain basically incorporates the reload. So if you want to, you can go read that guide. It goes a little bit more in depth than I will do here. Let's go back to our spreadsheet here. But what we generally look at in Division is first burst outside of certain situations. So there are some fights in Division. I think a legendary Tidal Basin, the final boss room, which goes on for quite a while. Sustain might matter there, but overall we pick on burst and then try to find weapons that aren't horrible in the other two categories, because alongside of sustain, as we generally talk about that, there's also damage per mag. Damage per mag, of course, is just the amount of damage that exists in the mag. Basically, it is basically the base times the mag size. And it is important as well, because if the damage per mag is exceptionally low or the sustain is exceptionally low, you might be better off with another weapon. And that used to, for instance, be the case, as we'll actually highlight with, for instance, shotguns. Like double barrels have really high burst, they have really low sustain and very low damage per mag. So we don't pick them that much, we just skip them. But yeah, let's go actually into ARs. Not much has changed here. For the top end, we have the FAMAS and the F2000 still there. One thing we can kind of look at is, yeah, we have these -1 mods, and we kind of have to look at them on build in the end. But overall, the F2000 has enough compensation, as generally that 5 crit chance, or 10 crit damage now, because we have that option now finally, is going to be around like 2.5 to 3%, depending on build. Which is actually the amount that the F2000 is ahead of the FAMAS, almost, basically. So those are kind of going head to head. This Honey Badger, though, is going to fall behind and going to be middle in the pack. Same for the PDR and same for the AKM, because they're going to lose that 5 crit chance as well. But yeah, they don't have enough compensation damage-wise. But of course, Honey Badger then has much better handling than the F2000 or the FAMAS. Paul is actually a really one standout that I would say. FAMAS and F2000 basically for now for just all-out damage still. FAMAS, though, with a longer reload, kind of needs to be fast hands, or of course the burnout, which also got a buff, which is somewhat awkward. I generally prefer fast hands, but definitely pickable. Although has moved up quite a bit and is going to be my choice overall for a pick for ammo conservation. So where generally I would have like an ACR or a Mark 16 on a character, just for when we're open worlding, we don't need all out damage, but I do need to not run out of ammo, basically. Then I would use weapons like those. That's going to be replaced here with the Fall. Even though it has a 40 round mag, if we actually look at it in the sustain charts, the fall used to be very low, both on somewhat in the middle in the burst and kind of low on sustain. Now it has a much better reload than some of the things around it, and its base damage is basically one of the highest, making it so that, yeah, for ammo conservation purposes, fall is really good, and overall, actually, fall is not looking too bad. It was a weapon that I generally wouldn't pick ever, but now. Then we have the CTAR. CTAR is actually an option as well with fast hands again because of that reload. But the CTAR and the FAMAS are not that far away from each other. And while the FAMAS has more damage, the CTAR has the option, is a lot more handleable. It is much more, it is a little bit more accurate, but it's also a lot more stable. It is less of a handful than a FAMAS ever would be. So for comfort, the CTAR, where in the past it was definitely not a choice, now I could see myself taking. The AK and the AKMs are actually pretty low, even though they have a little bit of compensation going for them in the sustain. And that's kind of the thing. We no longer have those like standouts, because even though I'm kind of saying, you know, FAMAS and CTAR and F2000, they are at the other end, basically, on the sustain charts. And that makes it so that some of these, for instance, like the TKB, that used to be always a good sustainer, is now even more so of a good sustainer, all the way at the top, but it's at the bottom of burst. And that's what they kind of did. That's the theme. If you did not watch any of the other content going over this a little bit, that's kind of the theme. They have made weapons that are bursty and weapons that are sustainy, and given basically almost everything a spot, but overall we don't pick sustain weapons. And that means that basically then what ends up happening here is that this mid-tier of P416, M4, G36, Carbine 7, SIG, and AUG are all kind of pickable. Although I would say maybe the list maybe ends at SIG, maybe. But especially if we need a long rail, yeah, these are all with long rail available. SIG and AUG aren't. So these would be our picks kind of for long rails, although of course we have the fall as well. But then the fall has 40 rounds. And that's kind of the thing. I kind of like this because it's no longer just pick up Hamas. If you need a long rail, you pick a G36 or ACR. That's no longer the case. Although, of course, that does come at a cost because, for instance, I wouldn't pick the Mark 16 anymore. I wouldn't pick the ACR anymore. TKB, only really the Kingbreaker. They are all still close to each other. And if you have a grade 25 weapon or grade 20 weapon for now, or such, or maybe even you've already put something to 27, and that isn't the top pick, yeah, that's worth using because until you maybe upgrade to something else. Because yeah, that's gonna outcompete the 9% or such that you're, or the 10% or more from grade 27 on a build. That's gonna put even the lowest weapon at the top, right? As long as the other one isn't graded. But then of course we could have a grade 27 FAMAS. So yeah, I do kind of like their high-end balancing quite a bit, and that was kind of the theme through all of the other videos as well. With Duck Exotics, it's a little less so. I'm not that impressed with their balancing here. We need to look at these, of course, on build, because, for instance, something like the Bighorn has no crit chance, no crit damage. When we put it on a crit chance, crit damage build, it suffers a little bit because of that. Same for the Strega. It's you know, it has 5 crit chance, 5 crit damage. But then we get to things like the Capacitor and the Eagle Bearer and the Chameleon and the St. Elmo's engines that all have pretty decent crit chance, crit damage, pretty decent talents, and are pretty high up in their burst. For the moment, for the time being, a lot of the exotics, for instance here, definitely the Bighorn, definitely the Capacitor if you have anything over 2 yellow cores, Eagle Bearer, Chameleon, St. Elmo, and the Strega all are a little bit above the rest, especially with talents. Although, of course, we have now also stronger talents for some of the, something like Killer is now 70% instead of the 40%. So we have to kind of see it on build, and we'll definitely, you know, eventually get there. Let's move on to SMGs and talk there. And indeed, continuing on with SMGs, we'll keep the burst up here, but definitely here again, the theme is, if it's high on burst, it's kind of low on sustain. And of course, then quite often, some of the higher burstier ones here have lower damage per mag, which is kind of the balancing factor. But I still think in here, the Vector 9mm, so the TAC Vector and the Vector 9mm both kind of look really good. Same for the SMG9. This has enough compensation with a little bit. I feel a little bit better handling, but some disagree kind of with me. They don't like the handling of this thing. But the SMG9 and the SMG9A2 kind of are landing around the same, where that -1 mod of this will kind of even them out, but around there, of course, around that 96%. But that's kind of fine because, yeah, sometimes these, the SMG9s do have a little bit better ammo conservation, but not by too much because they're also just 1K. One thing that we have as well in the SMG class to keep kind of in mind is all of the better bursters are pretty low on their optimal range. We can basically, it's almost as if they're sorted by optimal range from shortest to longest. And yeah, that's definitely the case. And then you have to remember as well, things like -3 mods here will put them basically 7 or 8% below. And that makes, yeah, things like the 1928 and the Tommy gun still not really end game picks. They are pretty handy when you get them when you're just leveling or such. Because yeah, you don't need that magazine slot. So same for kind of for the PP19. The PP19 is of course kind of drop a little bit lower because of that -1 mod that it has. And then we kind of reach actually this mid pack, where we have the MP7. We kind of also have the MP Vector 45 for a long rail, because the first long rail one, if you're using flatline or the crit damage mod. So one of the things, of course, that they change is crit damage mods being 10, being kind of equivalent to the 5 crit chance mods that we had always. But for the underbarrel crit damage, you need a long underbarrel rail. One thing I'm kind of considering adding to this, but that's going to be a project for later, although I've put it in my notes, so it will eventually happen, is on the right side, somewhere over there-ish, on that right side, putting in all of the mods, basically, what if it's a long rail or not. There's, of course, some other sources, like the Reddit spreadsheet that has that, but to me, it doesn't have it in a clear way, so that might be an addition later. And we'll kind of need to know that as well, because for instance, with this as well, just theory crafting wise here as we're going off the path, off the reservation, Versatile, the new Versatile, Versatile was always annoying between SMGs and shotguns, at least outside of Descent, because SMGs had 21 and you wouldn't want to put 15 more crit chance on them because that was the better mods to use. So you were generally landing on 36 or maybe 31 if it was with 2 mods. Versus a shotgun that can only have 2 and is landing on 10 crit chance. So they were always awkward to kind of use together. A shotgun is going to stay on that 10, but on the SMG end, if you're taking something with a long rail, you can now put 3 crit damage mods and land on 21. So that's actually, you know, an interesting point to use it, because now the difference between them isn't as severe when you're swapping between them for Versatile. But yeah, that tangent. So yeah, it does matter now if something does have a long rail. And that isn't many weapons here. That is the Vector 45, that is the SMG, that is the MP5, that is the AUGs, well, 2 of the AUGs, and that is the UMP 45. Actually, with the MP5 as well, there's only 2 of the variants. Each of them have a 3rd variant that doesn't have a long rail. So there might be some value there, even still, to the Vector 45. Also, I wanted to talk here about one of the oddities. The Dark Winter has its old base. So the old base of a Vector 45 was 40,430, 40K 430. I know that by heart because that was also the one from the Oreo, which I used a lot for calculations, of course. So kind of became ingrained into me. It still has that. It still has that base damage. So for the time being, before they change that, because they should, for the time being, that is actually closer to this and closer to, well, the same RPM, so it's gonna land pretty close to that attack vector. So for now, the Dark Winter is actually looking exceptionally good, but that's likely for the time being. And then we have kind of this mid pack, MP7, MPX, MP5. That's kind of, I would pick these, especially they have better handling. MP7 is one of the better handling ones. MPX is also a little bit better handling than some of these. And of course, not as much as ammo hogs, especially as well. The MP5 is kind of these, kind of the lowest RPM in them, if you want to somewhat conserve a little bit ammo. And then kind of at the Banshee AUG and everything below it, I wouldn't pick them anymore. Even though actually, yeah, if you're picking an MP5, because the thing is, with an MP5, you would have the long rail. I would only pick really the MP5 if you're using that long rail, because otherwise I would pick the MP7. The Banshee then doesn't have that, so That's why I would kind of leave that out. I would pick the MB5 if you need that long rail, or just go with a Vector 45. But again, there is no like clear standouts here anymore. It's no longer just pick the MP7 or pick the Banshee, because although the Vectors here do look better than most of the others as a category as well, overall they've been moved down a little bit. SMGs, same for rifles, a little bit moved down, which I do find fitting. SMGs did overperform to me, especially if you're using them in shorter range. So this, as a balancing factor, I'm not per se against. And then, yeah, sustain-wise, we kind of see the flip of there again. And this is kind of the reason as well why some of the picks, well, for instance, with the Vector 45 and the Vector 9mm, well, actually, the attack vector has such a fast reload that it is actually kind of outcompeting them. The Vector 45 and the Vector 9mm as well, their reloads have gone up by quite a bit. That's kind of awkward as well. So, for instance, this Vector 9mm, I would go fast hands. The Vector 45 is still kind of usable. Of course, keep in mind that this is just at the reload, just from the watch, nothing else. So, for instance, if Strikers comes in with 15 weapon handling, that reload goes down a little bit. Let's talk about the Oreo, the Ouroboros. The Ouroboros RPM turns out to be not that 1250 that they said, and not the 1250 that was in PTS 2 and 1, even though they said we're changing it to 1250 in PTS 4, PTS 2. It was always in PTS 1, it was already 1250. The final version is 1275 base, and then a 10% mod, of course, going over it, giving this 1403. That was one of the first things I noticed. It's weird. They might still change it. But for now, that is giving it a little bump up, but not enough still. The Oreo is still a little bit behind attack vector with killer or some such. I would take a damage talent attack vector 9mm over the Oreo, unless you have a very graded Oreo and you don't have that one yet for now. It is a little bit behind, especially because there's one very high standout weapon in here. The Chatterbox is laughably OP. It got both a base increase and a talent increase. As I talked about in the blog, or my thoughts on the PTS, I feel it should only get one of the two. It got both. At 2 stacks, it is basically the equivalent of the new Oreo. At 3 stacks, it beats it. At 5 stacks, it's basically, if the old Striker existed, it would be equivalent to the old Oreo. Or no, it's with the new Striker, it's equivalent to the old Oreo. So yeah, that is quite excessive. I'm kind of sad about that, because I was hoping, you know, because now they can't nerf it now again, although they might. We'll see. Backfire also actually kind of looks good, especially with that 100 stacks now that it has. Its talent change has been much more useful. And a lot of these as well have been taken to, I said with Oreo, to 15 crit chance, which makes it also easier to swap between them. It's also one of the things actually in ARs, which I didn't talk about, but a lot of the ARs, the Chameleon, the Eagle Bearer, the Almo, all now have 15 crit chance, which is also the same 15 crit chance that most high ends will have. So you can actually swap between them much easier. Same here actually, which is kind of nice. And then yeah, overall, the Chatterbox is very much a standard. If you haven't tried it yet, try it for now. I wouldn't be surprised if they change it in the future a little bit. Yeah, let's move on to the next one, which is going to be LMG. As we go into LMGs, and in the LMGs as well, there's now been a full rebalance instead of just that pull-up of 20%. That does mean that a lot of weapons have dropped down a little bit, but overall the burst of LMGs is looking pretty good. But then, of course, they have their own downsides. Suppression, the first shot not really being accurate. There's, of course, always, a little bit of debate on if LMGs are if it's okay to even run them in sometimes in groups. The two we'll talk about first is the RPK and the LAD6. They got moved down quite a bit, which isn't that great for them. Especially the RPK kind of got hit pretty hard with also a -5, and overall as well a really long reload for both of them. So you either need some recoil compensation from build or from talent to even really consider them. So to me, they're kind of out of it, because now what we have is especially this M249, the Mark 46, which are all, there's 3 variants of them. All of them are basically the same with a little bit of handling differences, tiny amounts. What we should look at here is, I should explain first, the weapons with rate of fire at the end of them, ROF, they have a rate of fire mag in them. So that, for instance, means in the MG5, that'll be a 50 round mag, which is not really, to me, this is not really a real weapon. So first off would be this MG5 with the pouch as a 100 round magazine with the, this is the non-infantry version, the one that has only 2 crit chance or crit damage mod slots. That's really the first one. What we see then, though, is that actually, yeah, between that and the infantry MG5, there's again that little gap, making actually both of these kind of viable. There's enough of a gap that that infantry MG5 is not far enough ahead that the compensation in base damage for this non-infantry MG5, this will likely be ahead, I think. But we'll, in the end, of course, on build, kind of have to compare them. But then what options that we would have is, especially if we were to go with a Negev or M249 with a rate of fire and somehow negated their reload, which currently does exist. The holster is the new exotic holsters that they have added, or the new exotic holster that they've added. It's currently reloading your mag for you, so we can actually pull out some of these. But actually, where we would start to really look is with a lot of these with pouch, because while we could take the rate of fire on some of the 100 round mags, we definitely wouldn't take them in the 50 round mag. And then, yeah, we kind of see infantry MG5 is kind of a pick, but that would have the same 100 rounds as his M249 with a rate of fire mag. So you have to kind of consider that if you're kind of going for that 100. But then, yeah, that reload on the M249 is really what is its downside. So you need to mitigate that somehow. Fast stands, of course, is an option. Or, yeah, for instance, lone starring with that holster, as we kind of have now. There is, again, no real, like, per se standout. The RPK and the LED6 were definitely standouts in the past. That's no longer the case. But we do have basically a pick between the M249, the Negev. The classic M60 is not ahead enough, I feel, of the E6s and the E4s to be a pick. So, but the E6s and such can be a pick because now they're the kind of slow firing. And then we have actually, yeah, the GR9 and the Stoner. The Stoner I would generally never pick. The Stoner, of course, always has that muzzle mod is basically fixed. You can't put anything else there, which is something I feel at some point they should just address and just take away, basically, or give it some compensation for that. The GR9, of course, can be a steady-handed choice, and then especially with this rate of fire. So if it's with rate of fire versus this M60 with a pouch, which could be, for instance, a good times, which could have a fast reload, I might go with the steady-handed GR9 because, yeah, they're pretty close to each other, and then a rate of fire mag. Let's keep in mind that taking this to 250 rounds is just a bad idea, in my opinion. Just take it at its 200 rounds, put a rate of fire magazine in there, or pouch, and take it like that. But overall, the M249 really is, and the Negev and the infantry MG5 are kind of the picks I would have here overall, which was also handling wise and such. They all are not too terrible. But yeah, I wouldn't pick RPK or LED6 per se anymore, which is kind of sad as well for the newly buffed, new reliable. That kind of goes with it. If we look at the exotics, these exotics, again, are kind of overtuned, in my opinion. The Bullet King now has a 15 crit chance, and can have that third crit chance mod. If you're going a fast stance Negev, which has the same burst, they have the same burst, why would I ever not pick the Bullet King, which has the option to never reload, which is much easier. And the reload, for instance, for Negev is so high that yeah, we wouldn't pick that. So honestly, if we're kind of going M249, maybe with a fast stance and then rate of fire mag, that would be competitive to a Bullet King. Because otherwise, if you're actually fast standing for the time being, a Bullet King is maybe the way to go. But then everything else is kind of higher in burst. Now, of course, the Pestilence, because of its horrendous reload, the Iron Lung kind of because of its often reload, even though it's a lot faster now. Both of those kind of fall behind. And also, yeah, the blue screen went to 200 rounds, which kind of helps it a lot. But burst-wise, we have the Pestilence kind of exceeding everything realistically when we kind of exclude the two rate of fire infantry 5s there. Kind of take the MG5 here, which is also... while the Pestilence also, yeah, it kind of has no crit chance on itself. You would generally take its crit chance third stat. Kind of landing around higher than some of these. And then, of course, the Pestilence actually has a decent damage bonus. This was kind of my complaint as well, kind of chatterbox style about the Pestilence. And yeah, I did go into the game like this. I think it is overtuned. And for now, definitely, you know, run around with it. Same kind of for the Iron Lung, because Iron Lung does have 10 crit chance and even 40 crit damage. No, 20 crit damage. Yeah, that's going to be competitive. Even with this reload happening often, it is now much faster reload, and especially on build like Ongoing, which has a reload bonus, this isn't that bad. Blue screen also, if you're using its utility, because of course the Iron Lung technically has a little bit of damage in that fire. The Pestilence has quite a lot of damage in its talent. The blue screen doesn't have damage in its talent, but it has utility. Of course, it can disorient, it can disrupt. So all these exotics actually look pretty good. And overall, I would say maybe a little bit better than some of the high ends. Although, of course, we do have things like Sleipnir, which can do insane things, even more so now. So yeah, overall, the exotics are kind of good picks here. If you're picking in general, the M249 is a really good pick, the Negav is a good pick, and the MG5 is a good pick. And all three of those are also kind of real LMGs, which I kind of like, having ran RPKs quite a bit in the past. So yeah, let's move on to the next one, which is rifles. And of course, rifles have gotten a big change. First of all, they've all been taken down a little bit as a class. And that is because most of them, not all of them, most of them do not have a full auto fire. So you hold the button down and it just goes till it's empty. Instantly, what came to mind with these weapons is that they will be really good for ammo conservation, even though you have a smaller ammo pool than ARs in the back end, especially with some of the things that hit quite a bit harder, like the Mark 17 and the M1A CQBs and such. Those could be really good, just general ammo conservation tools. Now, of course, here we have weapons that are quite different, especially in their mag sizes, even more so than LMGs. The discrepancy is much larger. And that's also the thing that will kind of hurt things like the M1A CQB and the classic M1A, as they're very low on their sustain, as they have really long reloads together with really small mag sizes compared to a lot of things. Because yeah, for most of these as well, I'm no longer doing the leaving out the big mag. We're just going big mag on all of them because I feel that is the better choice than trying to go a stability mag. But then there's of course the option as well of the 15 round mag. I'm gonna eventually do a whole video on that, because could it be useful to take that 15 round mag and have a little faster reload with 5 rounds less? I'm not sure, honestly. I've been trying it out here and there, and I don't hate it, but also I'm someone that after every kill, I religiously reload. So it's kind of a good fit for me, but overall, we kind of have to look at, first of all, the sustain numbers, but then also it kind of depends, right? Like it depends on if you're killing fast enough, or if you're more in the mode of just unloading mag after mag into, let's say, a raid boss, or if you are just running around, especially for instance, in something like Summit, where you're like killing one enemy, reloading while you're running to the next one. But that might be something interesting. But for now, I'm just taking big mags here. And yeah, we're no longer doing that stability mag, which especially in the sustain and such charts kind of mattered, because honestly, I wouldn't anymore, right? We just take the way we're using them now is no longer that way. Here, we do have a little bit of a standout. So first of all, we have the M16A2, although that is not the standout. That one did not get full auto, so that one is still clicking, but it does have a good burst. And honestly, it does have a good sustain as well. This one seems off to me, to the degree that I'm like, maybe they misinterpreted something, but we'll have to kind of look at it. overall, I don't think still this will be a good pick because that 3-round burst is much more annoying to use, especially as you have to keep clicking when with some other weapons you don't. You just hold the button down. We can kind of skip the classic M1A and the M1A CQB. One thing of note is that the SOCOM M1A, which used to be a different base than the M1A CQB, is now lined up again, which they should have been for forever. In TU10, the SOCOM didn't get buff, the M1A CQB did, and that should have been both of them. That was obvious that it should have been both of them because they're variants of each other. They should be, it's similar to, let's say, the different variants of a M16 or a Mark 16 or a ACR variants or some such. And yeah, the M1A CQB had just a higher base, and also it has a technically a little bit better stability. So it was, so SOCOM 11A is actually usable now. At least if you want to use these, the choice to make with these is if you're doing it for ammo conservation, because yeah, especially if you're firing, if you have a 15-round mag and you have a 550 rifle capacity in the back of it, basically, that 550 is going to go a lot further with this base than it will with something like ACRSS that has much lower base. So ammo conservation wise, this could be a pick. The reloads are kind of horrendous, but you could still pick them. One place that I really already like rifles is certain builds don't care much about rate of fire. Ongoing is one of those, and ongoing really cares about damage per mag. And of course, rifles, just by having 50 rounds and then a much higher base than ARs, but then much lower rate of fire, fall perfectly in line with that. Umbra as well doesn't really care about base RPM, but actually works really well with these rifles because you're not constantly reloading, you're just upping up the RPM, but you can still have decent firing times in comparison to doing it with a vector, which just burns through the ammo. And as well, Negotiator always was good with not caring about RPM, so it's a good pick as well for rifles if you're kind of looking for places to put them. Because we also now have Aces, but Aces actually, to me, doesn't make sense. And in the future, we'll actually look at comparing some of the buff builds, some of the, but yeah, that's a future video. Here, I would pick, generally, the SIG is a really good pick. One thing we have here as well is there are two different type of rifle firing, or ways that the rifles fire. One is that it fires and it goes back to that center point. If you let it, it'll maybe jump up a little bit. And then you have weapons, which, for instance, the SIG is. If you actually hold down the button, it is basically going like jumping up, and it's going a little bit up, but not too much. Comparing that, for instance, with a lightweight M4, if you hold down the button, it just goes to the ceiling. It is, if you ever used Unhinged in Descent, kind of like that. So there are different firing patterns here, and especially the SIG and the MDR do have flat firing patterns, which makes them much easier to use, but they're much more scatter shots because of that. So with rifles, you would think they're good for long range, but they never were, not unless you really invest into some weapon handling. And the second that you're investing in some weapon handling, you're going to lose even more burst. So generally, I would just use this as ARs, basically. Some builds will kind of gravitate towards them, but one thing to remember as well, as I've seen a lot of people going, rifles are super OP and such, they're never going to be, and there's one big issue, and I hope they balance that in the future. This isn't just, I dislike rifles. I really do like rifles. The second stat on rifles is 17 crit damage. That is versus, for instance, SMG's 21 crit chance. As you may have noticed, we just had 5 crit chance, 10 crit damage occur on the crit damage rounds. Basically, crit damage should be double. Compare that as well to 12 damage to armor for shotguns, 12 damage to targets out of cover from LMGs, 21 damage to health for ARs. 18 crit damage is laughably low in comparison to those. So that's always going to kind of kill rifles a little bit for now. That doesn't mean that they're dead. That just means that if you're using them, just be aware of that. You're dropping a little bit of burst, basically. You're gaining firing time overall, which can be really nice, especially for just ammo conservation purposes as a secondary as such. You can go with Fox and Zmia, for instance, as well, where you have 2 bonuses for them, especially for like high ends and such. But overall, yeah, rifles, they need that second stat to be either, for instance, 40 crit damage, basically, or 42 even, to be competitive, or maybe something else altogether. 18 or 17 crit damage is not competitive. And then with the bursts, yeah, they're not keeping up. The thing is, though, we do have good sustains on them. And yeah, good ammo conservation. So you have to make that choice, and it is a choice worth making for some builds. For instance, yeah, as I said on OD, yeah, I'm going with the rifles. But yeah, overall, SIG, especially the CQB and this the normal non-CQB. The CQB actually has enough compensation. I feel that it's going to beat the other one. ACRSS and Lightweight M4 are very much weapons that do not go back to their center, so they're a hassle to kind of LVOC as well. They're really an annoyance to kind of recoil compensate. And while the Resolute and the UIC all are then again flat shooters, they're solo on their burst and somewhat, while they do a little bit better on their sustain, they're still as well here not even really at the top here. Then we have also the 1886. It got a buff. It has also a really good reload now with 8-round mag. It has a higher base for headhunting. Yeah, that's no-brainer, right? Let's go actually to the exotics. Dr. Home is actually not a bad pick, especially if you're kind of going focus. But though Vindicator overall is going to be beating it with its talent, of course. But Dr. Home can be actually a pick there. Merciless does not have the auto firing just because it has a click down, firing on click down and then firing on release mechanic. So they didn't give it its full auto, which is kind of sad. But if you're still into clicking, it is the best it has ever looked, but that's still not great. Diamondback with that higher base now as well. If you're not into doing determined stuff, Diamondback is a go-to. Agonizing Bite, of course, is one of the strongest talents that we can have, and if you build around it and even put in maybe some crit damage instead of some weapon handling, because you don't need all that weapon handling anymore, the reload is kind of okay now. Ravenous is also a standout, now that you can auto-fire and not recoil compensate with the same hand that you're kind of aiming with and firing with. It's actually much easier to keep it on target, and yeah, just spam shoulder swap and just melt whatever's in front of you. Here in the rifles as well, we have one addition with fast hands. Fast hands, of course, did get a little bit of a reduction. The other categories always had a fast hands one. Here for rifles, I wouldn't say fast hands makes that much sense because you have such long firing time that most of the times you can be completely safe or in between waves when reloading. But we also have the base damage version here, which, yeah, as expected, you would have the 1886, then the Classic 1A, then the Mark 17. One standout here is, though, that the UIC actually is higher now than M1A CQB. That's the one that I wanted to point out. So maybe actually this UIC could be a pick for, as well, for ammo conservation, you could pick this, but you're giving up a lot of burst. To me, too much with it. So yeah, again, the two SIGs are, to me, really great picks, and of course the CQB has the artist tool, the perfect rifleman, which I've been kind of really enjoying. Let's go on to the next one, which is going to be shotguns. And on the shotguns, here we see actually I'm going to use these as the thinking of generally why you don't go for burst to the detriment of everything else. Or any single stat to the detriment of everything else. So for instance, here we have the double barrel shotguns, the sawn-off and the other one. What we have here is, yeah, they are very high on their burst, but of course there are 2 shots and then you're kind of out, which means you're reloading a lot, which will make their sustain horrendously bad. It will make their damage per mag, yeah, disturbingly bad. And then we don't pick them generally. So that is generally the picking order of this. We generally go by burst. Division is very much overall more a game about burst output, where we don't have those super long engagements. Overall, most of our engagements can be, a wave or 2, and then we're kind of just recouping. So Going into this, there is actually a standout in the shotgun category, and that is the SASG, the Staggies, where they are actually high enough on burst and good enough on sustain. They don't have really any particular downsides except a pretty long reload, of course. But not one to really throw off, and especially, of course, we have a perfect version of this in the Tsunami with perfect pummel. Bypassing this, Tsunamis, I feel, is generally a really good pick in the shotguns now. If you're using the shotgun as a shotgun and just murdering things with Hunter's Fury or such, if you're using it as a headhunter, then we're gonna scroll down and yeah, the base damage variants here are here. The SPAS is now overtaking the 870, but on build, I'm pretty certain that the M870 will win because you can put a 7 headshot mod in there. In the magazine slot, you can slap a 3 or 5, depending on which 870 headshot on the scope, basically. And that will likely outdo the SPAS, because the SPAS, of course, has no mod slots. So 870 is likely still the best choice for headhunters. Although, yeah, SPAS is definitely competitive with it now. Going back, if we're not headhunting, yeah, we're just looking more at burst. The rock and roll and the ACS and such, especially the ACSs, have gotten a much worse reload speed. That makes them a little bit harder to use, but overall as well, at least the way I generally, for instance, use a lot of the ACSs is for Heartbreaker and for Striker, where we use them for stacking. I generally don't reload them in combat anyway. I just unload them, whatever I unload them and then swap to the main weapon and start using them. So it's not that big of a change. Same as well for the 612. It's gotten a lot worse. The 612 used to be the general pick if you're burst and sustaining, kind of, especially because it had a really fast reload. It was the top on burst, although, well, after the double barrels, it was the top on sustain because it had a really fast reload. Of course, the Scorpio is based on it, and that had also a really fast reload. They've really taken away its reload. They've really taken away its oomph. It is mid-pack. I would pick a SASG overall. And then, yeah, we have kind of the hard hitters, which are technically kind of low on burst. But, of course, we don't pick the 870 or the SPAS, although, well, the KSG as well has a big magazine size. I wouldn't pick this, though, anymore over because the KSG we could use for pummel, for normal pummel. You could get 3 kills in 12 rounds, but now we just need 2 kills in 7 rounds for the SASG. So I generally will go with the Tsunami here. And then, yeah, the 870 and the SPAS will be kind of the headhunter tools. I think the 870, although we'll try that on build eventually. Although, just to put it in your mind as well, you can just side by side check them on your own build and see which one taps higher. But yeah, those two will be headhunters, and then SASG kind of the general pick. Although Super 90, especially for instance for things like because of course the Super 90 has the option, because actually the Super 90 and the SASG are pretty close to each other on burst. They're pretty actually not that dissimilar when it comes to sustain as well. They're kind of side by side. One is of course an magazine reload. The other is per shell reload. Sometimes the magazine reload is more handy. Although, for instance, especially at Tsunami. A Super 90, though, you can kind of put 1 shell in between running around, or several shells. So for Hunter's Fury and stuff, Super 90 can still be effective. And as well, for instance, in the uses of like explosive builds, eclipses, I have a lot of 612s there. I'm going to go likely with the Super 90, where I can just put in 1 shell and trigger, for instance, whatever I need to trigger off of that. For instance, in sync or perpetuation or something like that. Just so you have a quicker reload, because the 1 shell reload on this, if you just need 1 shot, it's faster than the SASG, of course. If we go to the exotics, yeah, Scorpio got hit hard. It definitely went down by quite a bit, especially in its burst and its sustain, and basically all of its stats. As yeah, it's taking over the stats of the 612, but it's not dead. The Scorpio is no longer that overpowered. It's just generally overpowered, because at the end of the day, only the Scorpio can do what the Scorpio can do. So still, you can stun lock enemies with it. It doesn't matter that you take 2 more shots to kill them. It's still the best way to, for instance, go after hunters or rogues or some such. You just slap on a Scorpio, and yeah, that poison is coming 1 shot later, that disorient is coming 1 shot later, the damage buff is coming 3 shots or 2 shots later. That doesn't matter. It does less damage. That doesn't matter. You're stun locking them still and just murdering them. That's much more important than its damage being horrendous. And yeah, Sweet Dream now actually, of course, has a higher base and competitive base, but we still wouldn't use this for headhunting. Although I've been kind of thinking, especially if you're not using things or aren't per se going headhunter. Although, well, generally even with headhunter, you could of course use this and then on the elites, and then even if you have something like a purple with a helmet and you don't wanna deal with that, you can melee them and just take them out that way. Overlord is still, yeah, the issue for the Overlord, it's talent. It's not going to be saved by any of its stats. Yeah, let's move on to pistols next and discuss that. And let's start on pistols. There is in here one standout definitely, and that is the Harvest. The Harvest, as it looks here, with its burst is pretty high. With its sustain, it isn't high, but it's competing. Of course, has less crit chance than the rest. So with these pistols, I'm showing how much crit chance you can put on there at max. Now, of course, you would generally want to match what you have on your main weapon. The Harvest, though, of course, has a really high as well base. If we kind of sort by base, let's talk actually Headhunter here first. Yeah, the Harvest is the obvious pick. Although, of course, Harvest, hopefully it'll be back again with the December, with the holidays hoarder, basically. If you're missing that, the 586 and the 686, so both of those are actually the same weapon. Basically, the handling of this, the 686 is slightly better. And they are basically 9%. Well, the Harvest has 10% more damage now. They did change that from 20 to 10, which makes it a lot less impactful. Although, yeah, if you can get a Harvest, be sure to get one. It is definitely a top item to pick nowadays. But yeah, otherwise you could just go with a 586. If we go outside of Headhunter, maybe for a secondary or such, I'm mostly going to go myself with these M45s and this TAC 1911, as these are the first ones basically that have maxed out crit chance available to them, so they'll fit on most builds. Although, of course, for most red builds, we're still gonna go, even though it's over there, with the TDI card custom. The TDI card custom does, of course, the skill tier. And as kind of with the Scorpio, it's the only one that can do that. So on a red build, I'm going to go with that. On a lot of skill builds and such, where I'm on 6 skill tiers, I do like having a pistol in there with either Future Perfect or, for instance, for some Eclipse's Perpetuation. I'm going to start swapping those to M45s, although, honestly, it's not going to be a great difference. If you're maining a pistol, I do think, though, that, yeah, the M45s, these look as the card did basically as the top dog in this series. So we do, of course, have a lot of rifles or a lot of revolvers above them. Generally, the revolvers are, well, again, they are, the other weapons are kind of, they're high on the burst and then pretty low on the sustain, because yeah, once they hit that reload, they have long reloads. Although with the revolvers here, if you're wondering why these numbers are green, and actually with the shotguns as well, some of these weapons, they basically have a slot that nothing else than a reload mod really goes into. So for instance, with the revolvers, they all have a revolver slot where generally, like, there's nothing else than plus 20 reload. Same for some of the shotguns, especially if we're kind of using them in the burst settings, because you can also put a 7 headshot damage there. But yeah, that in pistols, that's gonna be their number. So we're just putting that in just to keep it a little bit more fair here. But yeah, overall, I would pick the M45, the card 45 being the base of the TDI card custom if you're using a TDI card custom. But again, here there's no like real per se standouts. If you're making a pistol build, if it's a Headhunter 586 or Harvest, if it's overall and more like a maybe a bulwark build that you want to kind of just unload pistols in, I would pick the M45 here. And the reason for that as well is, yeah, if we have, for instance, we have this, of course, this other 1911. This is the non-tactical that has no crit chance. Compensation-wise, it will not have enough. We'll eventually, of course, go also and put these on build and kind of compare them there. But yeah, for now, the M45 is kind of the top pick here. Although, one thing that to point out is that the X45s, well, they also kind of have they have a 15 crit chance here that aligns a little bit better with, of course, some of the ARs and stuff that we have. And then they do have a little bit lower burst, but they're still good enough. Also, some weapons here, even though we're kind of showing the optimals, these, of course, have really short optimals. For instance, the X45 has a little bit longer, but also the X45 actually has a drop-off that isn't direct. It is a long drop-off, so actually you do more damage at longer ranges, which can be a thing, as, yeah, we have Pistol Arrow this season. If we then go, Regulus got a little bit hit. Its bases and such did not per se change. What it did get hit by is a little bit longer reload. And that does affect it. You definitely feel that it takes much longer to reload. But honestly, as a balancing factor, I'm not against it. Regulus is one of the most OP things as well, and still is. It's really still the only thing that can do this. Also, of note is, of course, that 282 is still much higher than this 256 that the Harvest even reaches. So it is still the king of headhunting. Liberty, overall, yeah, got moved down. The D50 base got moved down. The D50 is basically as well no longer really a pick for headhunting. I don't mind that as much as I really didn't like the recall of it. For using this with a shield, it still does what it does, but overall, yeah. Because as well, we have, of course, let's talk about that one first. The Mosquito got a talent change. Actually, I think on tanks and such, this will be a much better pick. If you're already going kind of where you were using Liberty to maybe heal your shield, using this to actually mark the target and kind of make them point at you, and then also mark them for a debuff, that's much nicer, honestly. Busy Little Bee still does Busy Little Bee things. It did get a little bit of a change to it, but nothing too drastic. And yeah, its reload is still pretty good. Busy Little Bee still does Busy Little Bee things for those moments that is needed. Let's move on to the last one, which is MMRs. And going into MMRs, we're not really doing burst and sustain for most of them. We do have that for the now auto-firing SVD, SOCOM Mark 20 and the G28 and their exotics. But it doesn't make sense to do burst and such for bolt actions because we're not per se firing them at their burst. Quite often I see some people going like, you know, even doing burst calculations for MMRs and such. It makes no sense when you're not firing at the RPM of it. So even with the pistols, we sometimes would be maybe using them in that way where we're just unloading as fast as we can. MMRs generally do not work in that way. What we do care about is their base. Now, one thing of note here is that we have 3 weapons here that have here next to them +5 weapon damage. Here we have their actual bases, and the reason I'm doing it this way is that the Model 700, the Classic M44, and the Hunting M44 all 3 have a slot where generally their really only choice is to put 5 weapon damage. It's a mod that you can put into the integral magazines, the non-swappable magazines that these have. So we're kind of comparing them with that here. Now, the Model 700 looks like it's at the top still, but if we actually think about names, well, if we're using an Ekim's long, thick, yeah, Model 700 is gonna likely outdo everything else, especially if we're gonna kind of going for that talent as well. If we're going for Determined and not going for Ranger, Perfect Ranger, the White Death, of course, is a classic M44 carbine. With that extra headshot, that will take this over the Model 700 in general. So if you're going for Determined, the White Death is kind of the top dog once again. The hunting M44 is not too far behind, but it really doesn't have anything worth going for it over a white dead. Then we'll reach actually a pack, which is all of these are with a magazine-based marksman rifles. And in there, they've done actually something that I really enjoy and really like about how they did it. If we go for the custom M44, the M700 carbon and tactical, although generally you would just pick the carbon, the tactical does not have that forward or the underbarrel mod slot being able to be anything then other than really crit chance, which isn't what you use for MMRs. We have the SRSs, the A1 and the covert, the SR-1 and the tactical 308. All of these are basically around 2%, 3% of each other, especially if we kind of exclude the tactical 308, which is a little bit lower. The others are, yeah, basically within 2% of each other. So it is almost a visual pick. You could still go with a custom M44, which has the highest base, a little bit more harder of a hitter. But that comes at the cost of well, in this case, magazine size a little bit, and then this pretty high reload, because yeah, the M700 carbon has 2 rounds more for that reload, even though it's a little bit longer. But actually, yeah, the ones that have a little lower base, they also have less egregious reloads. That's how they've kind of been balanced. And of course, as well, their handling-wise, the tactical 308, even though it's the lowest, is still a pick because it has some of the best handling. Now, though, as well, we have plus 30 accuracy and stability mods. What I've been actually doing is mostly taking the plus 40 on the muzzle with that hit of 10 to optimal range. And that is enough to make basically all of these weapons swayless, where normally we would need both the muzzle and the underbarrel to achieve that. All of these weapons on a normal hotshot, which of course has a ton of weapon handling to begin with, can be made swayless with just that muzzle, so you can actually put the other one towards accuracy, which, for those that don't know, the stability is mostly the sway that it affects. The accuracy is your flinch for when you're getting shot at, and also if you're moving and then stop and then aim, how fast the reticule kind of tightens up. That is affected by accuracy. So we can actually put in an accuracy mod, which helps these quite a lot. Overall, they've dropped by quite a bit. The SR1 used to be in the 480s, so even the highest in here is not reaching that anymore. But of course, actually with the global modifier that we have now, yeah, you can start on elites even with the tactical 308 because of that humongous increase just by the global modifier. And then once you start adding some passives into it, where you get things like Tapper, yeah, it goes through the roof. And you can even quite easily, with any of these magazine ones, one-shot even rogues once you're kind of capped, once you're stacked in your headhunter, quite easily with the global modifier on. Overall, I do think for myself, I will likely put white death on most characters as just when I need to hit as hard as I need, and generally as well give each character one of these magazine-based ones, just because they are much easier to use. You can't make the hunting, the classic M44 especially, does not have that muzzle slot, so you can't put the plus 40 stability on it, so you can only do plus 30. And yeah, it does not become swayless because already its base sway is much higher than those. Basically, all of these magazines ones can be made swayless, which I quite enjoy, like not having any sway, not having it kind of go off on a journey for itself when you're trying to take the shot. Yeah, is a game changer. I have a bunch of SR1s that are graded, so I'll likely be keeping a bunch of those. But yeah, if you're going if you want the top pick custom M44, it has all the muzzle slots. It is a pretty good handler. It has a much longer reload, but that's not that big of an issue, especially on a hotshot that has like dozens of weapon handling. If we go to the auto-firing ones, although actually no, let's go to the exotics and then we'll go to the auto-firing ones. Because they don't really matter in here for base. We'll look at them in burst and sustain. Nemesis didn't really get changed. It still does Nemesis things. Always did, always will. And yeah, it is really effective still. Mantis does have a longer reload than it used to and a lower base. Although actually no, its base is higher actually than what it used to be. So, but it has a longer reload now because actually base went up because the covert SRS did go actually up in a little bit of its base. So it's actually hitting harder than it used to, but it has a pretty annoying reload now, which is a little bit mitigated by Hotshot, but still not to the degree that we would like. Then we have the auto-firing ones in the Dread Edict and the Sacrum. Both of these are much more... they are held back by their talents more so than anything. An auto-firing Dread Edict is not too bad, especially it's a reload mechanic that it has. I've messed around actually with just over-weapon handling a build and trying to use this. And you can kind of get there, especially with the new mods, although, well, not on that, but on SVD. You can actually get to a point where you can be kind of accurate, even blind firing, and full auto firing with SVD. The Dread Edict, though, is not that, of course. But yeah, overall, I feel that it still kind of suffers for it. Yeah, overall, both of these are kind of they could handle an update. If we actually go to their burst and sustains, yeah, overall the SVD is the burst king, but of course, it being a much smaller mag, it's falling behind on the sustain, and then of course the magazine ones are doing much better on the sustain. Overall, if you are going to auto fire any of these, which I wouldn't recommend, really only the SOCOM I feel was the one that if you put enough into weapon handling and magazine and stability for it, and even a little bit into accuracy, is the only one that you can kind of auto fire. The SVD you can do as well, but you're not gonna. Its reload is too often. It does actually flatten out much quicker than the SOCOM, but yeah, just overall it's not that usable. Overall, I think these becoming a full auto is more of a gimmick, and they were just like, if we're doing the rifles, let's do these as well. I don't see them being that useful, neither of the exotics either as well. Especially, of course, Dread Edict kind of was a good fit for aces, but now that we have rifles for aces, I would generally pick those. So yeah, we've come to the end of this long saga. We went through all of the weapon types in the end. Although yeah, that was kind of also needed, of course. Let's go actually to a mystery that I kind of want to have a look at, and then we'll conclude here. As I want to talk a little bit to an issue that we've quite often seen and has always been a little bit in the background. And I was kind of hoping maybe if others are out there and maybe have an idea to come forward, or well, maybe test it themselves and maybe come to a conclusion and then just tell me what it is. We have a lot of weapons here, for instance, that have 0.5 behind them. This is due to just back calculating. So the way that I back calculate when I do this is we usually make a build with 100 weapon damage. 100 weapon damage means that basically the number shown in your weapon damage stat on the stat screen is basically double what the base will be, because it's plus 100%. So you can just divide it by 2. We often get odd numbers there. Not odd as in weird, but odd as in literally odd or even. An odd number divided by 2 is always going to give a 0.5, of course. But the weird thing is, of course, if these numbers are actually flat and round, and they were being multiplied by a build that is flat and round at 100, so we don't have like a 99.7 or something to get to some weird numbers. Where is this decimal point coming from? Because I'm going to guess partially is that there's either they're calculating up from a base, from the lowest weapons, basically grays, and they're multiplying by a percentage, or they're at 40 set and then basically breaking them down to those other numbers. Either way, you would think that the numbers would be generally round. Now, there's another option here, and that is that because to get this offset, it's either going to be on the base or it's going to be on the build. So a build could be that, I don't know, a full holster 15 weapon damage is not 15, but is 15.01 or some such. Now, over multiple accounts, this is so this isn't tied to me or my weapons or my gear or such. Or multiple accounts, I get the same numbers here again. These 0.5s are kind of weird because also they're likely not 0.5s. They're likely 0.2s, 0.3s, 0.4s, 0.5s. And while I feel doing them like this, at least with these, I've tried it already a few times. With the 0.5, you're better off. You're closer. If you use this in calculations, you're usually going to be closer to the final number that the game, like if you're using it at the range, will give. But this, I think, is actually the cause usually, where we're a little bit off. I don't think these numbers are not round, or what we have on builds is not round. Now, I can't data mine. I don't have anybody anymore as well in my immediate circle that could data mine. I used to know a few. They no longer are active, so I don't have that option. I'm curious if anybody can do that. So if you can and are willing to step forward, and can of course keep that under the radar. Or I don't think they will really mind if we actually go through their data that much. But yeah, this is an oddity. Now, this oddity as well could be there, for instance, with the output that we're getting here and the offset that we're getting with their numbers. But I've tried it at multiple ranges of weapon damage, and we get the same numbers over and over. So, but yeah, if anybody has good ideas for how to solve this, as my idea was always been, I do it at several different ranges of weapon damage, and kind of pick the middle one, which generally, is the one at 100. But just because of the numbers that we have, it's basically, I don't have precision over 0.5. It's either one decimal underneath there, because we get basically, we don't get any numbers behind the dot on the weapon damage thing. So yeah, if anybody has some ideas, feel free to give me a poke, and yeah, if we can figure it out, I would love to. The best would be actually if at some point they decide to, of course.
Hostile broadcast detected.
What would be nice is we do have the option of showing base, but for all of those that have used it, they will know. But also for the others that don't, we get a truncated number here, so we don't get a full number here. If they just gave us the full number, that would save me so much time. That would also maybe fix this, and then maybe if they also showed the decimal there, we could figure that out. But for now, we're kind of stuck with it. And I'm hoping to maybe make some, try some ideas out. I'm kind of out of ideas other than just calculating it at different weapon damage points, and seeing what kind of pops up the most, because you generally get a few 0.3s and then a 0.5, and then, depending on. So, yeah. If anybody has some ideas or has the ability to maybe go into game files, I'd be very interested in that. Let's go to the conclusion here and round this all out. And that concludes our long and in-depth look into this. Although, of course, not as in-depth as we'll have in the future, as we'll go into specifically weapons and on-build as they exist here. We'll be updating those and making fresh ones for in the future. So expect those. Also, I've been updating some of the guides. The named guide, for instance, now does include the updated gear that has been added, and also the list that they added in for which weapons drop where, even though there's already some known discrepancies here. So we'll likely add those in. And I'll be doing the exotic ones, and as well, actually, as another call to action, if anybody has confirmed drops of Strega or the holster out there, with maybe a screenshot with it being a drop with a normal item and just as a targeted next to it alone, the item, because that would prove that they are coming from targets. If you can get those to me in some way, I would love to see those, as we'll hopefully they will be in in target loot. Otherwise as well, the Iron Lung and Collector and such that were missing being in targeted, and the custom knee pads actually, and Overlord. If anybody has seen them drop and in the same way, being next to a normal drop and then them being the targeted, I would love to know that, because hopefully they fix these as they are currently not in, or well, in the last season they were not in targeted. Also, what I've done is, which is going to be the subject of the next video, we have new updated DPS calculations for talents, the talent versions. And yeah, as those may be aware of the old versions, yeah, these are a little bit bigger and a little bit more intense. I've added a bunch of talents in here. We've updated them, of course, to their current parameters. And also made a perfect one, but we'll go into this in a future video as we'll discuss them in depth and also how to use them. So yeah, that's coming up in the future. For now, if you did enjoy this video and want to help out, if you can do any and all of the algorithm things down below, that is always appreciated and well worth it. So I will do the shilling. And also, since recently, I do have memberships available for those that really like it, and if you are willing, I will not say no to your gracious contributions, which will be, of course, used as are here, for instance, on Bad Choices with buying Premium Plus, as that is where the costume that my character is wearing there is from. So yeah, and yeah, in the next one, we're going to go likely either with a Striker build showcase. If I'm not ready for that, we're going to go with the talent calculator video. But those will be coming up, and I'm going to make a few build overviews as well, as a lot of builds have, of course, minor upgrades, and as well, once kind of everything is updated with the DPS tables and such, we're going to go into actually updating the build collection, which I haven't even really touched yet. So yeah, those will be all upcoming. So I hope you join me for those, and as always, have a good night.